Services Marketing, MKT 625, lecture number 8.
Assalamu alaikum, Khawateen wa Hazrat. Wasim Hassan welcomes you to lecture number 8 of Services Marketing MKT 625 at the Virtual University of Pakistan. In the previous lecture, we learned why we need to have 3 additional variables of marketing mix for services. What is it that really gives rise to those 3 variables, and how the marketing managers can really bring those additional variables into play when they come up with smart marketing strategies to deal with services. The wide variety of those variables provide us with a bag full of tools that is at our disposal in response to different situations which services provide from time to time. And because of the character of services, because of the variability in particular, we need to have different combinations of marketing variables to deal with different situations. The variability is one of the most important elements of services marketing because variability has a direct bearing on the quality aspect of services. And I would say that quality is a huge, huge challenge for services marketing managers. There is no way that you can have quantitative parameters for quality for services, whereas for the manufacturing process, you really can have those parameters. In the absence of that quantification, the best thing left to the marketing managers is to industrialize their process, which means that they define their routines in a way that systems and procedures get performed every time and each time in just about the same manner. But then, since we are dealing with humans and it is not a manufacturing process, there is an element of variability. The variability presents itself not only from the point of view of a service provider providing his service, it also creeps in because of different levels of expectations on part of customers. Just to give you one example, 2 flyers flying the same airline may have 2 different opinions of the service provided to them. One flyer may rate the service as first class, whereas the other one may rate it as just about average. The former one who rated the service as first class may have done that because he is a first-time flyer, whereas the other one they may have rated the service as average because he happens to be a frequent flyer and exposed very much to flying. The lesson to draw for marketing people is that they've got to be very close to their customers so that they can understand the variations in expectations. Expectations could lead to development of quality on part of marketing managers, and therefore it is a very important area, a huge area which takes into its fold so many different aspects. The aspect which is going to be the topic of learning today and the focus of today's lecture is about gap. What is a gap? That is what we are going to understand. How that gap occurs and what are the tools or ways and means available to managers to close that gap so that we can come up to the expectations of our customers is going to be the topic of learning with focus on the gap and expectations. Okay. Whenever customers think of the buying services, they develop certain expectations. When they have consumed the service, they develop certain experiences. These experiences are known as perceptions. And when they compare their perceptions with the expectations with which they had developed before buying the service, they find a gap. For the simple reason, because they do not find the service product up to their expectations. Why that happens? Well, experts could have given 4 different levels of the customer gap, and we are going to look into the reasons why that gap presents itself at 4 different levels. The first is the gap between customer expectations and management perceptions. The second level of gap is between management perceptions and the quality standards. The third one is between the quality standards and delivery of the service, while the fourth one is the gap between the delivery of the service and communication. They're all very interesting and make it mandatory for us to fully understand the logic behind it, because once we understand why this gap occurs, then we are going to be in a position to understand the evaluation process on part of the customer. And you will recall that evaluating a service product is much more complicated than evaluating a tangible good. And we shall talk about that also in a few more words later. Coming back to the first level of gap between expectations of customers and perceptions of management, let me put it like this, that this occurs because management cannot fully understand what is expected by customers. Now, this happens given the fact that you have a beautiful organization which is woven around the purpose of the organization. You are fully sensitive to the values and objectives of your organization, and the setup that you have is second to none. And still the gap occurs because you cannot come up to the expectations of your customers. Why does that happen? It's a very interesting question. Well, the lack of understanding may stem from two different reasons. One is that you did not identify the need for that product correctly, and this may be due to the fact that the market study that you carried out, in order to identify that need, a formal study or an informal study within the organization was not really geared toward giving you the kind of response or the result which could have led you toward developing the right product. Another reason that can bring us closer to the point of understanding why we have not been able to identify the need accurately is the deviation from the right positioning of the product. Maybe we did not position the product accurately into the minds of our customers. And you will recall from your other courses on marketing that the consumer mind is known as the oversimplified mind, which cannot take many messages, and therefore for the message to home into the mind, it has to be a simple one. And maybe the company was not in a position to keep the message very simple, and because of the complications in communication, the message could not really get itself registered. So this could be another very relevant problem due to which the management of the company could not identify the need, and which led to the gap between expectations of customers and perceptions of management. So in other words, what is happening is that the company or the management is delivering something which is not expected or which is not up to the expectations. There is a criteria against which you can always gauge to what extent the positioning of your service is accurate. And it is always prudent on part of the marketing managers to employ that criteria in order to make sure that the message which you are going to send to the marketplace is a simple message and a message which is very close to the expectations of your customers. How do you do that? Well, in order to make sure that you choose the right positioning, you evaluate that against a certain criteria. And why do you evaluate that? Because there are so many benefits which one product offers, and it is quite challenging for the management to decide which one to work with when it comes to establishing the position into the minds of your consumers. So let us start talking about the criteria against which we can evaluate the right positioning of the product. First of all, we've got to see to it that there's a very strong motivation behind the positioning that we have chosen. And again, I would say that we have chosen one position because we should not be talking about all the benefits that the product offers. More on this a little later. So coming back to the point of motivation, the customers have got to have a very strong motivation for the product that you are selling. Now, this again takes us back to the area of the market study which we conducted in the first place to establish the need in the market. If the market study was carried out accurately with the right hypothesis and with the right research design, we would have gotten the right result and hence the right product. And maybe the positioning was not chosen in the right manner, so therefore we've got to be clear about the motivation behind that product, how strong it is. We've got to go for that positioning which really evokes the very strong motivation on part of the customers. In other words, if customers are expecting a better price, then you should be positioning your product from the price standpoint. If customers feel more motivated, if you talk about the quality, then you should be positioning your product from the quality standpoint. And there could be so many different angles from which you can position the product, because you're dealing with a product with differentiated features, and you're not dealing with something which is not competitive. More on this a little later. The other criterion against which you can evaluate the positioning of the product is the size of the market. What happens is, in many cases, marketing people end up identifying a size of the market which is not accurate. It could be overestimation. It also could be underestimation. Now, just suppose you have projected the size of your market as X. What if it turns out to be X minus 1 or X minus 10, meaning the market size in actuality is smaller than what you anticipated or what you projected? So in that case, what is going to happen is you're going to be nervous, and in that nervousness, you're going to make decisions which are not really a true reflection of the mixed bag of tools that you have at your disposal, and that is not a true representation of smart marketing strategies, because you are nervous and you are making quick decisions. Maybe you are not sticking to the point of focus, and therefore it might lead you into situations which are not really compatible with the positioning of the product. What if the market turns out to be X plus 1 or X plus 10, meaning it is much bigger than what you projected? Again, you're going to make certain hasty decisions. In that quickness, what you can do is you might dilute your quality standards. And like I said, quality is a huge challenge, and it is because of the importance of maintenance of quality in services that we are talking about expectations, or we are talking about variations in expectations, and we are talking about our ability or the lack of it to apply very smartly that mixed bag of tools that we have learned. Back to the point of the market size. Now, your quality standards are going to be diluted because, again, you're going to make some hasty decisions. You do not really have your systems and procedures fully laid out. You might like to aggressively increase your distribution, not realizing that the physical evidence which you are going to create in haste, and the systems and procedures which you're going to institutionalize there are not going to be as good as they are or as they were when you started on growing, or when you started pushing the market, only because the demand turned out to be much bigger than what you had thought. So again, you see, you'll have to compromise the positioning, and this effect on positioning is going to give you a distorted view of the market, and at the same time, the view with which the customer is going to take of this product is going to be very different from the one you have, and therefore the gap. The other criterion against which you can evaluate your positioning, another extremely important point, is the positioning has got to be very distinctive. It should not be vague, very specific and distinctive. Like I said earlier, there are so many benefits which one product offers because you are working in a very competitive environment, and therefore you've got to see that your product is first class from all different angles. It has to carry a good price. It offers the good quality to customer, therefore offering a good level of value to customers, and it is available very freely because you have a lot of outlets where you sell your service, and the communication is also very effective. But even then, the point remains, if the positioning is not very distinct, meaning if you're not talking about just one benefit which you think is going to do the trick to the mind of the consumer, the positioning is not going to make its place into the mind of the consumer, which happens to be oversimplified and which happens to have certain expectations already built in there. So in order to capitalize on those expectations which are there already, you've got to have something which really sits in there in complete congruence with that. So the two things have got to fully match. Until the time they match, there's going to be a gap, and there's going to be a variation, and hence difference between what he or she expects and what you are delivering. Another criterion against which you can test your positioning is the financial resource, whether or not you have the ability to support your positioning with the kind of resource it requires. Now, suppose you have chosen a position which seems to be making all the logic, meaning all the marketing logic, and you have done that in light of your experience by being very careful and sensitive and so on and so forth. If you do not have the right financial resource, you're going to be in trouble, because what if the product needed a massive communication campaign to launch which you are feeling constrained in terms of your financial resources? So that again is going to compromise your positioning and therefore lead you into a situation which will offer you with a gap between what you are offering and what the customer expects. Yet another criterion against which you should be evaluating your position is the sustainability of the positioning. Whether or not you are in a position to sustain your position. Now, this is all about the keeping competition at bay, meaning if you are in a position to sustain the positioning of the product, it means that you have a very unique positioning and competition is not able to follow that. And in case the competition is in a position to follow that, and you are not really supporting the positioning the way that you should, then competition may overtake, and as a result of that, competition may be known as the one having that positioning which was initially introduced by your company. The marketing literature is full of very convincing examples whereby there are companies that introduced certain products, and then those companies were not known for introducing those products because competition took over, only because of the fact that the original companies were not in a position to sustain the positioning of their products because of the resource constraint or because of compromise on the level of competence of the staff, or whatever was the reason. It is upon us to look into the literature and then determine what really happened. But all I'm saying is that you've got to be very clear about your ability or the lack of it to sustain the positioning that you think is the right positioning for the product. And if you can do that, then you are in a position to close that gap. If not close that gap, at least minimize that gap so that the expectations of your customers and what you are offering are very close to each other. Another criterion against which you can evaluate your positioning is the alternative which should be available to you if the positioning, which for the time being looks quite okay, did not really work for a long time. You will recall I talked about so many different benefits that one product offers or one product should offer. If one product offers different benefits and you should be sticking only to one in terms of positioning it, it clearly means that you also have other benefits to fall back on. Now, in case the positioning of your product is not working due to any given set of reasons or circumstances, that you should be ready to fall back on another benefit and reposition your product, but only because you think the new positioning is going to work. This should not be a preferable kind of a situation, but I'm talking about a scenario which can present itself given the competitive nature of the market nowadays. Another criterion against which you should evaluate your positioning is the pricing pattern, whether or not you really should be charging the price which you are charging. If you are charging a premium for your service, then you've got to be very clear about that it really is going to help you create that positioning into the minds of the consumer, and with the creation of that positioning, the consumer is going to not only stick to your product, but come back to you again and again and bring more customers. So this means that the value that you are offering your customers in terms of quality is so high that the customer does not really mind paying you a little extra in comparison with other offerings in the marketplace. So the point or the crux of the matter is that we have to be very clear about the positioning that we have created for our product. And once we have chosen the one positioning, we should be in a position to evaluate that on a certain continuum or on a certain criterion against which we can weigh that in order to be sure that it is not going to let us into a situation which will create that customer gap. I would like to give you an example here just to substantiate what I've been talking about. Just look at an insurance company which is very, very concerned about the level of premium its customers pay every year. Now, because of that concern, the company might get into an ingenious pricing strategy, thereby either cutting the price or giving certain incentives or even launching a communication campaign which centers on the pricing strategy of the company. A lot of resources have gone into this campaign, and just imagine the kind of investment which the company was committed to because it wanted to launch a campaign in order to reach its customers more effectively. And then one fine morning, the company finds out it is not the pricing its customers are concerned about. It is the settlement of claims they are really concerned about. So you can just look at this subtle difference between the positioning of that product from the pricing point of view versus what it could have been, meaning the positioning of the product could have been done from the claim settlement standpoint. And the company kind of wasted a lot of resources in terms of the money and time while it was coming up with that campaign toward pricing and all that. So this is the one example of one product that gives the two different views to two different parties, meaning the buyer and the seller. The seller thinks he is just about selling the right product, which is needed by the customers, and the customer views that very product in a very different light. And it is that particular light which has to be understood by the sellers, and these sellers have got to respond to that the particular light in a smart way. The second level of gap is between the management perception and service quality standards. We can say that the management is in a position to fully understand expectations of its customers. There is just no problem as far as the gap between expectations and the management perceptions are concerned. And the management of the company has been able to surmount all that we have talked about in reference to the first level of the customer gap. Even then, the gap is there. What could be the possible reasons? Well, the possible reasons could be that the company has not been in a position to specify the right standards for the product. Now, this is a mistake which companies may make, and the fact is that according to the marketing literature, this is one of the important gaps in services marketing. The wrong specifications of any service product are not going to make it possible for that service to sell effectively or sell briskly, so to say. It always will lead to problems of the gap, and the customers will always think they're not getting what they expected. Just look at the example of a fast food chain which is defining standards contrary to what the standards should have been. This again could happen because of the fact that the company is following the strategy of aggressive growth. The aggressive growth presented itself because the first outlet of the chain was very successful, and the management of the company thought that they should grow very aggressively, and they committed a lot of resources, they created more outlets, and at the end of the day, they started running into the problems of supply chain because they cannot properly maintain the supply chain of their food items and also other materials. There are stockouts, or when they're not stockouts, there are some quality problems. Again, the dilution of quality parameters which I talked about. And you will agree with me that there is no quantification of such parameters. They're very qualitative. All you can do is make sure that your routines are followed in just about the same way each time and every time. But then, if there are disruptions in the supply chain and you're growing too fast, you're not in a position to keep track of what really is giving you problems. And when you keep track of that, you're not in a position to correct that because you are following that operation, and you've got to see to it that operation keeps taking place in just about the right manner, but it is not. So there is something wrong with internal and interactive marketing, or you see that there is something wrong with the strategic vision of the company, and the top management is to be held responsible for the decision. The fact remains that it is going to create a gap, and the customer, again, because of the dilution of the quality standards, or because of the hasty decisions and related the problems and bottlenecks, the company is not in a position to deliver what the customers expect, and hence there is a gap. The third level of gap is between service standards and the delivery. In this situation, what is happening is that the company is fully in a position to perceive what customers expect, and they have identified the need very accurately. They also have laid down the standards very accurately because they are very clear about the market. They stay close to the market, but even then there's a gap there. Well, this gap may occur because of two possibilities. It could be either one of these two, or maybe a combination of these two. One is that the company does not have the competent staff which can deliver the service as per the standards specified by the company. The other possibility could be that the company does have competent staff, but due to certain reasons, they do not really feel motivated to deliver the product with the passion which is required to deliver that service. Both the situations could have a negative reflection on the area of human resources management. This really signifies that not proper and effective internal and interactive marketing took place within the organization to keep people motivated. There is something wrong with the policies of the company because of which people do not feel motivated. Well, given the first situation, if the people are not competent enough, it really means there is something wrong with the procedures of the company while it hires their staff members. And in the second situation, in which the people are competent but do not feel motivated enough, it leads toward so many different areas of the company. One could be that the pay scales are on the low side or the lower side. Other could be that the people do not really feel empowered. Whatever empowerment should be given in terms of the systems and procedures, the standardized systems and procedures of the company. There is no training and development within the company which can make people motivated, or there are no chances of growth perceived by the staff members. They know that they're not going to get that far within this company and are hunting for jobs elsewhere. So given this kind of a scenario, the people do not feel motivated. Inconsistent policies of the top management in relation to so many strategic areas. This is one of the prime reasons in this kind of a scenario. There are companies that get into frequent changes toward pricing, for example. They get nervous and they keep cutting the price from time to time. And when they are feeling very enthusiastic about the market response, they also do not hesitate in giving a jump to the price very frequently. Now, when that happens, it really disturbs the marketplace. It shakes the confidence of the customers. It may not show itself in the short run, but it does have its implications in the longer run. But the first casualty is the staff, and staff members start feeling very demotivated because they are not really used to working in an environment which is a reflection of inconsistent behavior on part of the top management, especially when it comes to making some very strategic decisions. This might occur because of the fact that the top management of the company likes to work in silos, which means they like to work in isolation from the rest of the levels of management. They do not interact frequently with the middle management and the low management, and also with those people who are performing these functions for the company, meaning very strategic, important functions for the company. And because of the lack of closeness between the top management and the other levels within the company, there's a gap. And like I said, the casualty is the staff members who do not feel motivated enough to deliver the service the way they should be delivering. And in turn, the casualty is the customer, and hence the gap between what is being offered and what is expected. Another the level of gap, which is the last and the fourth level of gap, is the one between the delivery and communication. We just learned why the delivery gap occurs, because people do not deliver for being either incompetent or being demotivated. The gap between delivery and communication occurs despite the fact that the management of the company identifies the need very well, very accurately. They have systems and procedures in place, and those systems are working perfectly. And they also have spelled out the standards very accurately. Their delivery mechanism is also second to none, yet they fail in meeting the expectations of the customer. Why is that? When everything seems to be in place and still the gap is there, is a very interesting kind of phenomenon, and we have to find the answer of this in the area of communication. It all boils down to over-communication. You see, what happens is that in the heat of wanting to sell more and more in a very competitive environment, and with the passion to stay ahead of competition, what companies tend to do is overpromise. And this overpromise is made with the target audience, with the result that it presents a gap. I will take you back to the fundamentals of communication, according to which you must not overpromise. Anything which cannot be delivered must not be made to look deliverable. When you do that, you are elevating the expectations of your customers, and at the end of the day, when you deliver the service, it is not up to their mark. And when it is not up to the mark, it creates a gap. So the problem still remains that the gap between the expectations and what you are delivering is still there, despite all the properties required to be a very effective services company. It is a very painful kind of a situation, which can be explained with the help of a very appropriate example. I will take you back to the insurance company, which is advertising very heavily settlement of its claims within 24 hours. Now, when the company talks about its ability to settle all the claims within that time frame, it is certainly creating a very specific level of expectations. And maybe that level is much higher than what it should have been. Now, what to see if the company cannot really settle the claims within that time frame, and the company is taking longer, meaning the company is settling those claims within, say, 36 hours or even 48 hours. But still, it is not 24. So the net result is that expectations of the customers are not met. Even if the settlement is taking place within 48 hours, it may not be bad by any given international standards. But the fact remains, it is not in line with what was promised. So this is where the overpromise lies. So you have to keep yourself from creating these kind of overpromises and talking with your target audience by not being able to live up to those promises. You've got to talk about the quality levels or your abilities, which are just about in line with the expectations of your customers. If you do not do that, then there's a problem, and there is a gap between what is being offered and what is expected. So that is why I said it is a very interesting gap, because this happens notwithstanding the fact that you are perfect in all other terms. I would like to summarize all this that I've talked about so far by way of showing you a slide which will summarize these things and further enhance the understanding about the 4 levels of the customer gap that I just talked about. Let's take a look at this slide. As you can see, the first level is between expectations and management perceptions. And needless to say, in one statement, management perception about expectations of the customers is not accurate. They think about one thing, whereas the customer expects another. So this is a very fundamental and basic kind of a gap, and this could be very painful and hurtful, because this reflects management's inability to correctly identify the need which exists in the marketplace, and it really points one's fingers toward some very fundamental abilities of the company that may create this level of gap. The second level of gap is between the management perception, meaning that in this gap, the management perception is right. So the management is beyond the first level and it can accurately identify the needs. But then there is something wrong with the standards with which it has spelled out, and it has not been accurate in spelling out those standards. And it is those erroneous standards which are leading toward the gap which still is there. Then you have the third level of gap, which is between specification standards versus the delivery. Now, this gap means that the first two levels are not there. The management of the company has been able to surmount the first two levels, meaning identification of the need is very accurate and standards are just about the right standards, but then the company cannot deliver because of the staff problems. And these are the problems I referred to a bigger area, which is the area of human resources. The company has got to do something with the human resources, the strategies, and some improvements have to be brought about if the company has to survive as a viable entity. Now, suppose the company is in a position to take care of all these three levels. There still is a possibility that the company might run into the fourth level of a gap, and that level, like I said, is a very, very interesting level, and it is extremely unfortunate if any given company runs into this gap, because this is just between the delivery and communication. I mean, starting with identifying the needs and understanding the expectations of the customers, to developing the right strategies, to delivery, everything is working perfectly. But then all of a sudden, what really goes wrong is overpromise. And because you're overzealous, and that leads toward your inability to live up to the promise, which is more than what you really can deliver. So this is like taking a bite bigger than what you really can chew. Don't do that, and don't be greedy from that standpoint, and talk about those things which are very much in line with the fundamentals of communication, meaning no overpromises. I can further summarize this by making the statement that the aggregate of all these levels of gaps is what you call customer gap. And the customer gap is a great challenge for marketing managers, because dealing with this gap or managing this gap is all about managing expectations of your customers. And until the time you understand what those expectations are, you cannot minimize this gap. So the challenge is to manage this gap. This is where the solution lies. Marketing managers do give it their best shot to completely eradicate their marketing practices with the existence of the possibility of the gaps which I talked about, but then something goes wrong somewhere, and they are not in a position to completely do away with the gap. So from that point of view, if marketing managers cannot really fully eliminate the gap, they at least must give it a try to minimize that gap, and that's where the challenge is. But in order to understand how to minimize that gap, we have to go back to the characteristics of services which I talked about in so many details, and I also indicated that I shall be talking about these from time to time, because they do lay the ground for further understanding of areas of expectations and then strategies and so on and so forth. So it takes us back to two basic fundamental areas: the characteristics of the services and the distinction between the properties of the goods and services. But before I start talking about these characteristics and the distinction between the properties of goods and services which have been drawn by economists, I would like to talk about two fundamentals of expectations which we must keep in mind, and these are not going to be something new. We are already very familiar with this terminology. One is expectations and the other is perceptions. Expectations, like I said earlier, are all about referrals, because what happens is whenever you are wanting to buy a service, you refer to so many different people, and you talk with your near and dear ones, and it is because of those referrals and word of mouth and other things you are exposed to that you build your expectations. And you build up your expectations to a point where you start looking at a service with the features of the satisfying your need. The other fundamental of this model is the perceptions, and perceptions are all about your experiences. Experience is a reference to your having consumed a particular service, and once you have consumed that service, you are in a position to evaluate that service. And it is this part of evaluation which takes us back to the area of characteristics and the difference in properties of goods and services. Because we're dealing with expectations and perceptions, and expectations which refer to the word of mouth and your exposure to that particular service that you wanted to buy is all about pre-purchase. You've got to make up your mind before you really start buying the service. And when it comes to perceptions, what is happening is you have bought the service and you are evaluating what you have bought. And therefore, we've got to understand the process of evaluation, because the objective is to minimize the gap. And the better you understand the process of evaluation, the better you stand the chances of minimizing that gap. And I would like to show you, with the help of a very brief kind of a slide, the concept that I'm talking about. As you can see from these two boxes, you have expected service and you have the perceived service. Now, expected service, you see, in this slide is the one which the people or customers have in their mind, because they're expecting something that will be delivered to them. And in the lower box, you have the perceived service, meaning you have consumed the service by the time you reach there, and whatever is in between is the gap. Now, if the gap is smaller, you are very close to the expectations of your customers. If the gap is bigger, you are far apart from expectations of your customers. So having seen that, we can talk about the distinctions drawn by economists between the properties of the goods and services. Economists say that the characteristics of services lead us to look into three different areas of the properties of the goods and services, and those are, which again I've talked about already, search qualities, experience qualities, and credence qualities. Credence is something which I did not talk about so far, but I have talked about search and experience qualities. For the sake of maintaining consistency of our understanding of the evaluation process, let us talk about in a few more words about what search qualities are all about and what experience is all about, in particular reference to the evaluation process. As you know, the search qualities basically refer to tangible goods, and it is those qualities which enable all of us to go to a marketplace and draw a distinction between so many different offerings by so many different competitors. And we, because of this search level, are in a position to differentiate between one product and the other. And therefore, because of this level of search, we are in a position to evaluate that particular product. And that tangible product, it has a lot of cues to give you in order to go through that the evaluation process which takes place before the purchase is made. But then this process is not complicated, it is not lengthy. By looking at the features of the tangible goods, meaning the way it looks like, the colors, and the literature which appears on the package, ingredients, and the trademark and the manufacturer of the product, you really easily can make a decision about that particular good. This is not the case for services. Take the example of the pack of biscuits. It is not a complicated process to draw a distinction because of the features I've talked about between a pack of biscuit and a pack of biscuit. Similarly, if you are out to buy a television or a motor car, it is not a difficult process to go through before the purchase is made. So it is the search qualities which, from the standpoint of evaluation, gives you relative ease for the tangible goods, and that does not give you this ease for intangible goods. When it comes to intangible goods, there is one more property which makes them stand far apart from the rest of the service products, and that is their attributes, which do not really make it possible for the buyers to assess the quality of the service immediately upon the consumption of the service. So in other words, customers could have to wait for a long time before they can really assess the quality of service. And do not forget that we are talking with a special reference to quality and the ability of the customer to evaluate that service, and in turn the ability of the marketing people to develop that product accordingly so that there are no gaps. These are the kind of services which have certain technical features which are beyond the understanding of general customers. To take the example of repair of a car or industrial equipment, the repair of air conditioner. Now, you have to wait for quite some time before you really can say whether or not you are satisfied with the kind of service that was rendered at a point in time which is in the past. So therefore, these attributes are known as the credence qualities, and when it comes to credence, reputation for these kinds of services becomes very important, and the word of mouth and referrals again take the very important role, because you've got to bank on these elements before you make a decision to buy a service which you cannot assess for a long time to come. So having had this understanding of the properties of goods and services, and having drawn a distinction by way of talking about the search qualities and experience qualities and credence qualities, I can show you a slide which is a very classical representation of these properties, because that is going to enhance our understanding of the evaluation process. Many experts have come up with this kind of a graphical presentation, and this shows us a continuum on which you see so many different products. Now, let me tell you that this continuum is very much similar with the tangibility spectrum. The only difference is that we are not just about to focus on where a product on the spectrum or the continuum sits. I think in addition to that, we have to look at the relative ease or the lack of it of the evaluation process from the customer's point of view. So in other words, what this continuum talks about is to what extent it is difficult or easy for the customer to go through the evaluation process. And when we know that, then we should be looking into different phases of the evaluation process on part of the customer. On the left-hand side, you can see the end of this continuum is all about the ease relating evaluation of different products. And the right the end of the continuum is about the difficulty involved in evaluating different services. And you can again see that wherever you have the ease of evaluation, you are dealing with tangible products. The first product at the left end of the continuum is clothing, and then on to watches, and then furniture, and then houses, autos, and then, very important, restaurant meals. So you can see that you're dealing with the evaluation of the first 5 categories of products or industries with relative ease when it comes to evaluation, because you can look at the features of those products, and when you really can make a distinction, because you can see the feature, you're dealing with tangible products, and therefore evaluation process does not present itself in a complex way. However, the right you move on the continuum, the more you realize you're getting into product categories which are giving way to intangibility, and because of that, the difficulty of evaluation is mounting. That is why you see the red color turning into blue. When it comes to restaurant meals or vacation for that matter, you're dealing with a service. In the restaurant, you're concerned about the service as much as you're concerned about the quality of food. When it comes to vacation, it's almost total service. I mean, how the travel agent behaves and the people in the hospitality industry offering their services when you are vacationing, and then on to insurance, and then television repair, and consultancy, which is a pure service, and then auto repair, and then medical diagnosis, as you can see, are all kind of pure services, and therefore they offer difficulties when it comes to evaluating those services. Some of these services relate to experience, and some of these services relate to credence. And that is why all these products or industries that sit on the continuum have been divided into three different areas in relation to their search qualities, experience qualities, and credence qualities. And having understood this continuum of evaluation, we can say with confidence that we are getting close to the process of evaluation, because the crux of the matter is that we've got to be able to understand that as the customer moves along the continuum, the customer is evaluating different products. And when the customer evaluates different products, the customer goes through different phases of the evaluation process. What are those phases, and what are the implications of those phases through which the customer passes are going to be the topic of focus in the next lecture. And in the hope that whatever I've talked so far has made quite a bit of sense to all of us, I would look forward to talking with you about the evaluation process in more details in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz, and thank you very much.